So that's really the power of virtual production, that you can just shoot all these different environments just back to back. You just throw it up on the LED wall, bring in some different art department stuff for the foreground, and go. Put in some atmosphere, some haze, and it's like magic. So I just love it.
La Pizarra, The Slate, exploring creative minds in the entertainment industry. Here's your host, Nikki Mondellini.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of La Pizarra. My name is Nikki Mondellini, and I'm very happy that you're joining us today. We're still in the middle of Season 9, and my guest today is someone who you heard before on Season 5 of this podcast, and I'm going to link to that episode in the show notes. His name is Scott Rice. He's an Emmy and Addy Award-winning filmmaker and director. You can find him on Instagram as @ScottRiceDirector. Scott has worked with talent like Glenn Close, Brett Favre, and Matthew McConaughey. He is the owner and executive producer of Two Shot West, a production company in Austin, Texas. And like I said before, I'm going to link to the previous episode in the show notes. And I encourage you to listen to it to find out more about Scott's career, as well as how the class that he teaches at UT with Matthew McConaughey, called Script to Screen, got started. Today, we're going to learn about virtual production. And Scott will share with us a workshop in which he directed Share Your Imagination, which is a film that he directed and wrote. And this was done at Stray Vista Studios. And together with Narwhal Studios, they opened up the doors and allowed filmmakers, both in person and virtually, to experience a virtual production set. Now, I don't know about you, but I really can't wait to hear all about this amazing experience. Just to let you know a little bit more about Scott, his work includes a staggering film festival record of 300 official selections and 85 awards. His films have been distributed on Comedy Central, Showtime, Hulu, Blockbuster, and PBS. And he has also directed projects for A&E, the Mental Health Channel, MTV Networks, and Sony Pictures. And now, let's explore the creative mind of Scott Rice. Oh my gosh, welcome to another episode here with us in La Pizarra. And, it's wonderful to have you back because there's so many wonderful updates in your life that I'm dying to ask you about.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to talk to you. I had so much fun last time. It was a real pleasure, and thanks for having me back.
It was great. And like I said in the intro, I'm going to link to that previous episode in the show notes, because if people want to know a little bit more about how you got started, about the script to screen class, because you went into detail about how it all started. And so they should definitely listen to that episode. But for right now, I'm so happy that you don't have a black eye anymore. But tell me all about that.
Yeah. So I can't remember how much I talked about last time, but I basically tripped on a shop cat in a gift store, and I didn't see it, and I went face first into a counter into a table, the corner of a table, my full weight into my eye. So I thought I was instantly blinded, and so that was 2 years ago. Then I had a couple surgeries to fix it because it broke my eye socket, and
really?
So then my eye didn't point the right direction. So imagine being a filmmaker where your whole life depends on being able to see, and then you can't see. And I was wearing an eye patch for a long time, and I saw double, the whole world. Imagine how dizzying it would be. So that's been my last 2 years, and I just had another surgery to correct it a little better. It's gotten a little better. So I just had a surgery about 4 weeks ago. And I'm just kind of enough with eye surgeries. But I tell you, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And a couple lessons I've gotten from this. Well, the big one is just gratitude. Because right after I got hurt, I just prayed. I'm like, just please let me keep my vision. As long as I can see, I can deal with the rest. And the eye, I thought the eyeball exploded, but it didn't. The eye is fine. It's just around the eye that's broken. So I'm just very grateful that I can see. I see double. When I look up, I see double and stuff. But if I hold my head right, I see fine. So I'm very, very grateful. And it makes you appreciate your vision more. As a filmmaker,
doesn't it?
I just don't take it for granted anymore. Every time I look at a sunset, I get chills thinking about it. I'm like, how beautiful. Just being able to see something beautiful now takes my breath away a little bit more than it did before. So I'm grateful as for the, as difficult as it's been. I think the net positive has been really great. All things considered.
That must have happened after our interview, because you definitely didn't have a black eye last time we spoke.
Yeah.
But oh my goodness, I mean, that really must have been terrifying for you. I can definitely, just to think about being in your shoes in that moment.
Well, there's so many people I know in the business who, there's so many of us who just struggle with a secret, issue, like a physical issue. Like I know a DP who has to have constant surgeries on his hand because he has hand muscles issues. Yet he's always holding a camera and he never complains about it. My aunt is legally blind, but she's a photographer and she's constantly taking photos. So, it kind of gave me an appreciation for people who do suffer, who do struggle physically and then mentally too. We all kind of have mental health stuff that we struggle with. And it's it just makes you stronger to just have to work a little bit harder to make your dream a reality. And I can appreciate that.
Yeah. And on the other side of that is knowing how you can persevere even through those obstacles.
Yeah.
Because, oh my gosh, I mean, if you can, like you said, it just makes you appreciate what you have a whole lot more. And then you excel at it because you're trying so much more. I mean, I've done shows. I don't know how I was able to give a performance in the middle of postpartum depression.
There you go.
And I went ahead and did it. And if you ask me to remember exactly how the performance went, I can't tell you.
Yeah.
I really can't. But the director came to me and he said, "This is one of your best performances." I'm like, really?
There you go. There you go.
Because it's, you just never know. It's just you compensate, like you're there, your creative instinct kicks in and, and you just, you make it work.
And I like that idea of instinct too. You just have to act on instinct because you're so spent. Yeah. You don't have your conscious mind left. You're so spent and you're suffering. You just act on heart and instinct and you get through. And that's sort of a great example of just the strength of the human spirit, that it's not really about our intellect in the end as artists. It's really about our gut instincts and how much we want it and how much we really love what we do, despite, any kind of obstacle that there might be either internally or externally. So that's so interesting. I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. It's one of those things, that you don't know, but definitely it's great to hear about all of these things because people don't know. They see the finished product, the products, the film or the commercial or whatever. And gosh, I mean, we're all human. We all go through everything that everybody else goes through. And we just keep pushing,
Yeah.
So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, definitely we're going to get into virtual production, but we spoke a little bit about the script to screen class, which is mainly for film. But now you said that the new thing is going to be done also for commercials. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, Matthew McConaughey decided, hey, let's do a commercials class because Matthew actually loves advertising, loves marketing, and that's a big passion of his. And we sometimes we look at film people and we kind of think, oh, they must kind of look down on commercials and stuff like that. And a lot of times they don't. I mean, a lot of filmmakers, a lot of actors, a lot of their main income is from commercials. And that's what allows them to go do the passion projects that don't really pay or pay as much, for example. And the same thing applies to Matthew McConaughey. He can pick any movie he wants, no matter the budget, even smaller things, because he does all this commercial work. But he actually really loves commercials. So we decided to put together a commercials class that we also co-teach. And we brought in a professor from the advertising department, Dr. Laura Bright. And this is our second semester we've been doing it. In fact, I just had my first day of class yesterday. and awesome. We have like 40 students. Half of them are from advertising and half of them are from RTF, which is radio, TV, film, the film program.
Oh, okay.
And then we all kind of work together to put the agency side, the creating the ad campaign and doing all the metrics and stuff together with the production and pulling off the vision physically on set. So it's really been a joy to do, and I'm glad we're doing it for another semester now.
And is it like the same kind of experience that you take the students on set and then they get to see everything that goes on, like from the ground up,
Yeah.
The set, or scouting the locations and getting everything together, the costumes and makeup and casting wise. So they get to see all of that as well. They get to see how actors are cast and how everything goes on.
Yeah. So we have kind of one component, which is in the classroom, where we show them how production companies bid on commercial work, put together a budget, the director puts together a treatment, and usually 3 production companies / directors are competing for the same job. So we kind of teach how that's done. Then we show how those meetings go. And then once you get the job, we show the pre-production process and the production process. And in last May, in fact, I directed a public service announcement for Matthew McConaughey himself. He was doing the Green Lights Grant Initiative, which basically is helping schools in the U.S. get federal dollars to make their schools safer.
That's right.
So we did this PSA. We did a 60-second spot where Matthew's talking to camera and walking through a school, and it was really cool. And I got a DP friend of mine to come out from LA to shoot it, and I had just students on set from the class. So they get to work with Matthew, who's their professor, but then also the on-camera talent. And also he's the creative director for the campaign as well. He's not just the talent. He's also the guy who came up with the idea. He did a similar thing on some of his Salesforce campaigns, which are really huge and play on national television and during the Super Bowl and stuff like that. So It's really cool. And like this semester, I know we'll talk about virtual production in a minute, but I'm shooting a commercial campaign that's also playing during the Super Bowl regionally in 5 states. We're doing a virtual production shoot, and the students from my class are really excited to be on set. I got a lot of volunteers because virtual production, it's just cool. It's like that's how they make shows like The Mandalorian. So everyone wants to see how it's done. And sure enough, it's just a remarkable technology. So we'll be on set in about a week with students shooting virtual production.
Can you share a little bit about what the storyline is for that, or is it like?
Yeah, I mean it's for a bank, and it kind of has a CG character, and it's comedic, and we're in a bunch of different environments. So it really helps us to do it virtual production because that allows us to be in a bedroom, then in a man cave basement, and then in a campsite in a desert, and then on a rural road with a moving vehicle. So, it's just like you can't get to all these locations. You can't shoot 6 different environments in 2 days.
Yeah, can you imagine the budget for that?
I mean,
the manpower and just it just
and the
takes
time
much,
it takes to travel, and then that adds to all the days you have to shoot. So that's really the power of virtual production, that you can just shoot all these different environments just back to back. You just throw it up on the LED wall, bring in some different art department stuff for the foreground, and go. Put in some atmosphere, some haze, and it's like magic. So I just love it.
So now that you're talking let's get a little bit more into that, because my question is whether, so you have a set and it has to be like really big. Do you build everything that you mentioned? Okay, there's the road, and then maybe it's, an interior set. It's a living room or a house and all. So you have all those different sets like you would shoot, like when I used to do soap operas, we had the set of the living room and then the house and then the school. And it was all, different, like smaller sets, but in a big studio. And of course, the cameras would just move from one place to the other. Yeah. Is it similar?
Well, it's different in that the camera doesn't have to move. So you're on this thing called a volume, where you have one stage where you can have all your action happen. So I shot virtual production for the first time, I think in November, and we shot a short film that was like an Indiana Jones adventure story. And it took place, it stars this kid who kind of has this flight of fantasy about him being an Indiana Jones-like hero. So it takes place on a city street. It takes place in an Indiana Jones-like cave, and then it takes place in a jungle. And we shot it in 2 days. And what we did is it has all these action scenes and running and all this stuff, but we really shot it in this 20 by 20 square foot space, and you would never know, because how it works is what goes up on the LED wall, this huge wall, it's 20 feet tall, is a 3D virtual environment that's done with a game engine called the Unreal Engine, and it's all 3D. And you put it up on the wall, and then you point the camera, and you might have a person in front of the camera. And then when you move the camera like this, the background moves too. All the parallax happens in 3D space, in that virtual 3D space. And that's what tricks the eye into thinking, oh, that person must be in this real environment, because I see him in a jungle, and when the camera moves this way, the parallax of all the trees and stuff moves behind that person. So it's a virtual set, but however, it's not really super realistic unless, like you said, you bring in real objects. So art department really brings in physical stuff. So in the case of a jungle, you bring in all these plants. In the case of a cave, you have all these rocks, and they're in the foreground, and then the midground, and then in the background behind the character, and then you have the wall. See what I'm saying? So all this stuff works together so that when the camera moves, you have the parallax of the rocks in the foreground and then the midground and of the character. And then you have all the digital rocks and the cave behind kind of moving in a similar way. And the background knows the camera lens, so it adjusts the focus based on what your focal length is and everything. And it's just like, it's really cool. And then if you show the floor, you have to bring in a floor to the set. So in the case of a cave, we brought in these flats that kind of look like dirt, and then we put fake rocks on top of them. And then you have the real dirt, and then you have this LED wall, and on the LED wall is the digital dirt ground, and you have to match the color of the two. Yeah. And you put some rocks around the seam, and it just looks like the background just goes into infinity, goes into this virtual world. And I found myself saying things to like the art director. I'd say, hey, I think we need to move that plant. Can you move that plant? Oh, wait a minute. That's on the wall. That's one of the virtual plants. I can't even tell. I can't tell where the real world ends and the virtual world begins. So it's just like, I'm just like a kid in a candy store playing with the stuff, because I used to work in games, and I kind of understand video game engines, and I've done a lot of visual effects, but it's really cool to do this technology because you don't have to shoot on green screen and then replace the background later. It's all in real time. You capture it, you're rolling the camera, and it's there. Like, that is a real background environment. Yeah. And it's like having, like a huge jungle set that looks like it goes off to the horizon. And look totally real. So I'm glad you mentioned green screen, because I was going to tell you or ask you, how is it different from having a green screen? But it's a totally different thing. So it's not even the same kind of a camera that you can use with a green screen. Well, it's the camera can be the same actually, but the technology that understands what the camera is seeing is different. You basically have a computer that's hooked up to the virtual environment that's tracking what the camera's doing and making the virtual environment behave in a way as if it were a real environment, responding to the camera panning or tracking or whatever. And one of the other amazing advantages is, the light that's hitting your character. If you're on a green screen, you have some green spill, some green light is bouncing off the wall, and that's kind of bad. And you kind of have to light the person based on how you think the background is going to look. But what's really cool in virtual production, you have all the light and the colors that are coming, let's say, from the desert sunset that's happening behind me. It's all bouncing around the studio and hitting me. So it's very immersive. It feels like not only does the actor feel like they're in a real environment opposed to being in this green space that they kind of have to imagine that they're in the, the desert. You can see it, and the quality of the light that's bouncing around is actually coming off the LED wall. And then one step further, if you have any kind of like glass or reflective material, the reflections show. So famously on the show The Mandalorian, the main character, the Mandalorian, he's got this Beskar metal suit, and it's very reflective. Well, if you're shooting on green screen, it would just reflect all the green and be a nightmare. That's why you couldn't use reflections on green screen. But because you're shooting virtual production and that background is really there, it's reflecting off the suit. And when someone's watching that image, their brain just goes, well, they must be in the desert because I'm seeing the desert reflected in the suit. So it has to be real. Likewise, cars, if you do a driving scene, it's so amazing. Like the windshield, the reflection of, let's say you have the environment going by you as if you're driving in a car, you can see all the trees going by in the reflections. And then your brain goes, well, I see all these reflections. They must be really moving. I see the environment in the background moving. I see reflections on the windshield. So has to be real. So there's a lot of advantages to shooting virtual production opposed to green screen.
Definitely. And do you use different lighting than you would use for?
We use similar lighting. I mean, the last shoot I did with Jimmy Lindsay, who's a great DP. He just worked on Ghostbusters, the new Ghostbusters movie. He's shot on Picard, the Star Trek show. And he just put all the lighting up in the grid. So it was very fast. We didn't really have to move lights around very much. It was kind of like being on a stage with all the lights set up in the grid, like a TV show, like you were mentioning. And you can just adjust the lights really quick on the light board. So it was a lot less, didn't take as much time to light because, when you're in a real environment, you got to move the lights and you got to put them on stands and you got to go out the window and put up flags. And then you got to move to a new room and all that. So all the lights are just set up for that very limited space that we're operating in. So it allows you to shoot
because exactly. You don't need to stop and relight every time you're going to, reposition or, but the only thing that you would stop in it is just to put the different physical objects that you would need, like for the next set. But
and
still, it's
sometimes
not a huge space.
Sometimes that gets pretty involved. So in the case of this jungle we did, and I can send you some pictures of it, it's, we had a lot of plants in there because the characters are doing this chase through the jungle. So they have to be running past real plants that they're interacting with and hitting. So there are a lot of real plants in the foreground and the midground and in the shallow background. But then the deep space is that wall that extends into infinity and really makes you believe that you're in this giant outdoor environment. So art department, It's not like it's putting art department out of business. They still have a lot of work to, bring in, if you're shooting in a home, you have to have some real furniture, for the actors to sit on and interact with. You have to have some practical lamps and things that are in the frame, or else it wouldn't look real. The only objects in the house would be way back there. And that's, then the illusion is broken.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I see another huge advantage is that if you're shooting exterior, you don't have to stop every time there's an airplane flying or an emergency vehicle going by or a lawnmower.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the case of, here in Texas, it gets close to freezing and the whole state shuts down. We can't even handle it. It's so cold. Everybody freaks out. So it's funny that, shooting here in January, I did think about that there have been times where usually the weather's pretty good in Austin where I live. But, sometimes it's supposed to be a sunny day and the commercial or whatever you're shooting calls for a sunny day and then it's pouring rain and cloudy. So it's awesome how you can be inside in the comfort. And actually in Texas, it's really the heat that becomes the big problem. Shooting in the summer outside.
Yeah.
I was shooting a campaign in August. It was like 112 degrees, and we're all just miserable. And so the idea of being in an outdoor environment, but in the comfort of a stage, is so cool. And not only that, an outdoor environment that looks utterly real. And then let's say you're shooting at sunset too. If you were using a real sunset, okay, you got 15 minutes of the good light. All right, let's hurry up and do this dramatic scene. We only got 15 minutes. Better get it right. Yep. Well, you could shoot a few hours on the scene. You could shoot as long as you want on a virtual production stage, because that beautiful sunset's just going to sit there as long as you need it to. So there's a lot of advantages.
Wow. That is beautiful. So do you see more and more production companies going into virtual production now?
Yeah, I see. It's getting really, so the stage I'm shooting on is called Stray Vista, and it's getting really busy. Like, my understanding, since we shot the short film I did, which was kind of a demo to show other filmmakers how you could use this technology, and to tell filmmakers that, hey, this technology is not just available to Jon Favreau and the people at Disney and Star Wars shows, that independent filmmakers can use this. And in fact, the folks who did the backgrounds on the Star Wars shows, they did the backgrounds for my short film. They're called Narwhal Studios, and they did it.
Oh, that's them. Okay.
Yeah, they did it because they want to make this technology accessible to anybody, not just the big expensive shows. So that's really cool. So I think that's starting to catch on, and you're starting to see more films and commercials that aren't necessarily huge budget use this technology, but it's getting to the point where it's more accessible now.
So I'm happy to hear that. So you don't have to have a huge budget to be able to use that
No,
technology.
it's not like, I think that, a few years ago, yes, when it was brand new and it was experimental, but it's really starting to get perfected. And then these virtual production stages are starting to pop up regionally across the country, like in Las Vegas and Atlanta. I think there's one in Dallas. There's one here in Austin. And, and everybody's getting in on the action because it's really cool. It's comfortable. Now, there are some things that make it tricky. So, for example, there's a lot more work in pre-production because you have to build the environment. So you don't get to just go to a location and say, well, I guess that's it. That's what we have to live with. Okay, we'll build our shots around this location. You in advance have to go, well, what are the shots I want? How do I want to cover the action? And what is the action? And then you build the environment around the story you want to tell, the shots, where the characters are moving and all that good stuff. So you have to have answers for the person who is building that 3D virtual environment, how the room should be laid out, which way do we want to be looking, all that good stuff. And then the DP has to work with the person who's building the Unreal Engine virtual environment, and they have to decide on the lighting that's going to be in the virtual environment and make sure that it's going to match what the cinematographer is going to do on the stage itself with the actors and some of the set dressing that's actually there practically on set.
And so would you say from start, like from pre-production to post-production, the whole thing would be now with virtual production less time for the whole project to be done?
Well, I think it evens out. I think it's a similar timeline. So, for example, the commercial campaign that I'm prepping right now, we have the same amount of time, about 2-3 weeks, to do heavy pre-pro. That's about the same time we would have had if we were shooting in a practical location. And we could have shot in a practical location. I just decided, hey, let's do it virtually. And then that allowed the ad agency to adjust the scripts to be a little bit more ambitious in terms of the environments we were shooting in. But I think it evens out. Where I think it speeds things up is if you are, like, for example, shooting on a moonscape or something. You got an astronaut who's in a spacesuit and they're walking on a moonscape. And if you were going to do that as a visual effect, you'd have to do green screen, and then all that would be in post. All the compositing, the building of the moon landscape, that would be in post. So that would take a lot of time and also cost a chunk of money, right? If you did the moonscape virtually, you'd pre-build all that. So on the post side, you wouldn't have to do all this compositing. It would be captured in camera as if that actor was actually on the moon and you really shot it with a camera. And then you don't have to do anything in post. So you use obviously you go into color correction. That helps sell the virtual production a little bit more. But you're doing color correction anyway. So it does save time and money on the visual effects side of the equation in post.
We've reached the end of part 1. Please join us next week for part 2 and the conclusion of this interview. In the meantime, if you can think of anyone who might benefit from this information, please go ahead and share it with them. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube if you haven't done so. Share what you liked about this episode on social media and tag us at Nikki Mondellini.